It is my esteemed pleasure, sir, to personally be meeting you, Mr. Peter Alberton of the Smithsonian. Obviously, that is who you are.
Well, yes, obviously I am Peter Alberton, and clearly not Zen Zany of that famous YouTube channel.
Well, sir, I'm here today to propose a new exhibit for the Smithsonian. Cultural life during the Renaissance.
That is quite an observation. But I gotta ask, how is the Italian Renaissance, a time all the way across in Europe, even closely related to life here in America right now?
That is a good question. How do we, as a nation far away on the other side of the world from Italy, relate to it? Well, quite simply, we have a lot in common with them, believe it or not.
We like pasta, and we despise Roman Catholics.
Even more than that, sir. Allow me to explain. Surprisingly enough, despite the cultural and revolutionary changes going on during the Renaissance, most of the culture remained around a medieval type of world. There were level caste systems, there were people who worked, those who did merchants, and those who were empowered, much like today. However, things began to change for the better as Italy's city life would begin to flourish. The centuries of the Renaissance saw major Italian cities turn from dark, dank medieval cities into thriving communities of art and culture and academia. Dwellings began to be designed differently as life in the city merged from the courtyards into the streets and public squares. What was once a palace now became a public place for all to gather and share their ideas and culture.
Out with the old, in with the new.
Much like today, weddings in the Renaissance were much different from medieval Italy. Rather than simply having their churches do it, they used to have celebrations like we do today. We're talking parties, we're talking everything you can imagine. They even had cake at some of their weddings.
Let me tell you, it's not a real wedding without cake. And bubbles. For some reason.
The only real difference is that you had to still pay a dowry like in medieval times. You see, if somebody wanted to marry someone of the higher class, they had to pay the family to let their son marry their daughter. However, it was still a time of a joyous celebration, and guests would often expect to be well fed and entertained before all of the ceremonies. Despite what we think all women up until the 1920s lived in servitude, women in the Renaissance began to take greater roles in social life. Although their role of caretaker of the household and the children remained the same, however, unlike the Middle Ages, Italian women of the Renaissance had much more freedom of movement, were expected to have a will of their own, and were be able to form an opinion. Although they could not wield power directly, powerful women of the Renaissance were often the so-called power behind the throne.
Sounds a lot like my wife at home.
Indeed, sir, indeed. Now, we're talking about the cuisine, the eating habits of the Italian Renaissance.
Pasta.
Those were just the beginnings of their culture. The lavish banquets and elaborate dishes of the time still had more to do with the Middle Ages, where wealthy diners often ate in pairs, sharing utensils and throwing discards onto the floor for the dogs. Food changed very little for the lower class. Fish, bread, some veggies, whatever they get their hands on. Meanwhile, the wealthy Italians of the Renaissance, especially the Medici family, would begin to break away from the eating traditions of old and create what was arguably the basis for modern gourmet cuisine. They began to incorporate New World ingredients like potatoes and peppers and things that were still new to the times. They even introduced into the common popularity the fork. Naturally, the elite had access to finer ingredients and exotic spices to make their meals, But over time, the people of Italy were able to get these spices, maybe at discounted or lesser quality, and they ate many of the same foods they do today, including pasta and salads. Trust me, it was definitely an all-you-can-eat buffet back then. Now, you want to talk about the parties? The Renaissance was a golden age of pomp and celebration, as the wealthy attempted to outdo each other in the public eye. Their reasons were varied. Maybe they wanted to build the biggest church they could ever achieve. Maybe they wanted to have a giant ball, invite everyone in the city to it. These events were big, were also times where the rich and poor mixed rather frequently. Processions could include every social status, from the highest pope to the lowest beggar.
Well, they clearly loved to turn it up in the 1570s, huh?
Lastly, just imagine being there in the Renaissance when you're watching the growth of your nation into something big, something powerful. That's what they did. They saw these artists flourish. They saw architects building chapels as high as the sky. We here in America can relate to that. We've seen our nation grow from a small colony of settlers all the way to the most powerful nation in the world.
So, you can see, sir, despite our differences being literally centuries apart, different part of the world, the United States and the time of the Renaissance had a lot of cultural similarities. We all grew as a society, we all began to explore art, music, and other cultures, and above all else, we just became more unified and more connected to one another through our shared love of interests and parties. And that is why, sir, I propose that next summer we open a Life in the Italian Renaissance themed exhibit at the U.S. Smithsonian of History.